Hey guys, and welcome to my week 6 thoughts and reactions video to each NFL game. With that, we'll obviously get started with San Fran and the 49ers and the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, I had predicted that I thought this was going to be a close game. It would have been a lot closer, honestly, if Seattle had not, essentially done nothing for the first half. Honestly, a very slow game to start. The San Fran not really gaining momentum until the second quarter. Clearly, they only had 3 points in the first quarter, 13 in the second to really put them ahead, make them look like they were going to run away with this game, even though I was like, Seattle's got weapons. And my overall thoughts on this game is that Seattle just did not look good. Geno Smith threw for over 300 yards, but off of 52 attempts. And, he threw 2 picks. And then you have the fumble issues. Obviously, Laviska Shenault the fumble on a return, and then he does redeem himself and get a touchdown later in the game that kind of sparks the potential comeback. So I feel like that sort of thing kind of offsets. Obviously, you hope for your kick returner to have one brought back, obviously, and then from to not have the fumble, but he did spark the comeback, for this Seattle team. And ultimately, what kind of derailed them, in my opinion, is the interceptions. And then, even the questionable call by the refs saying, hey, it wasn't a fumble on, the punt, the muffed punt or whatever, where it clearly hits off the guy's hands, barely hits off his hand. But regardless, I think that San Fran got ahead. They ran the ball well. Seattle couldn't pressure Purdy either and got 0 sacks on him. And then they also, like I said, they could not stop the run. And they could not run the ball themselves. I think that Seattle's defense ultimately got gassed in that game, and they just couldn't do really anything to stop and make sure that the comeback was complete, as well as the offense not really performing well after the third quarter and only getting a touchdown late in the game. But moving on, we have the London game, Jacksonville and the Bears. My main issue with this game and Jacksonville is that they just had no energy. No energy in this game, you guys. It was quite literally like watching like sandbags play. Even and the only sandbag I can give a credit to is Caleb Williams. Obviously he wasn't just a sandbag, but when your QB can sit back there, not have to move, not have to step, not have to shift around at all because of the line shifting, that's obviously a very good thing. And then on times he didn't find wide receivers, he was able to run the ball. And he had, obviously he had a pretty good game. I will say passing. But I do think that it takes from a performance like this when you are playing against bottom dweller talent. And that is all I'll say about Caleb Williams and his impressive performance. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Packers fan, but let's think about, if they actually played a team that put pressure on Caleb. And yes, he was sacked 3 times, but it was only for a 5 yards accumulative across 3 sacks. They only lost 5 yards because of it. And Caleb Williams ultimately just, he looked great. The one interception that he had, I will say, what a poor throw and a poor decision. Going deep. I don't know if the ball was late or whatever, but he mispositioned the ball really bad, and it's just another thing to me that like, oh, he wants to bomb it, even when there was no position for him to do so. And it's like the Jacksonville Jaguars, they hadn't had an interception on the season up until this game, and then Cisco picks him off, and Obviously they had a good run game. They had a really good run game with DeAndre Swift, but yeah, the Jacksonville defense just looks completely dead, completely unmotivated to play. I really think that they need, like they said, a culture change in Jacksonville. And I honestly think that, Doug Peterson, his seat is unbelievably hot. And I think the only reason he maybe didn't get fired after this game was because they have to play in London again. They have to play in London again next week against the Patriots, I believe. But yeah, Jacksonville, there's a reason why they're a bottom 5 team right now. And it's like Trevor Lawrence, to me, it doesn't even look too bad, but they don't have a running game to speak of, and they're making him throw it a lot when they get behind, and they just don't have a running game to speak of to help him, which I think is really affecting them. But moving on, we have Houston and New England. Houston playing a very good game. I thought the New England played them pretty tough. There were definitely some plays that were just blow up plays, like the Mixon run, the Dameon Pierce run. Crazy to me how, you're such a disciplined New England defense and the score doesn't tell about how well, to me, that their defense actually did play, obviously, because you gave up 41. Just a few really, really bad plays. But yeah, they were putting some pressure on CJ Stroud, not a whole lot. They're obviously missing Judon, who they traded. And overall, it's rebuilding time for New England. Now, going to Drake May, I thought he played very well, very composed, didn't force anything. Essentially, he was getting sacked, he was getting hit, but it didn't really rattle him to me. 20 of 33, it's a good starting point. I think that he will get better, drop some beautiful passes for a touchdown. I think Kayshon Boutte did very well, and he wasn't afraid to throw it downfield against what is a pretty good defense, and that was without really much of a run game. So, I think New England, I think that they've found a guy who is their I think that they found a guy who is their quarterback, but ultimately you kind of look at it where this is a team that, is building and needs to see who they're going to keep going into the future. Moving on, we have Washington Commanders and the Baltimore Ravens, a very highly anticipated game. Obviously, with this game, we have, Jaden Daniels, who's been playing really well. Everyone says he's the undisputed, rookie of the year at this point because he's doing very well. And he's just coming into I wouldn't say coming into his own, but he's playing the game at a level where it's like he's playing safe. He's doing a good job of taking care of the football. I think it's a sign of good things to come when you play a defense of the Ravens that ultimately I think they were kind of mad at themselves for getting essentially their teeth kicked in the week prior by the Cincinnati Bengals. And obviously the Cincinnati Bengals, as we know, have a very stout offense. It didn't perform as well as I thought it even would this week, though, against the Giants. But even so, the Ravens in a shootout with the Bengals last week, and I don't think that they want to have to win games. I don't think Harbaugh wants to have to win games, off of Justin Tucker, even though he is the best kicker to win games off of, but looking at the Ravens, this was a very complete game. Lamar Jackson, throwing really good footballs. The interception, I really don't think was his fault. but they played really stiff defense on Jaden Daniels. He ultimately wasn't really able to rush the football or run away with the football in that like he did in previous games. He had been running all over teams. He had, huge runs against previous opponents. I believe he leads the team in rushing and that sort of thing. But looking at this, I think it's a good sign for Washington, a little humbling of an experience, but they played a very solid game that they were never truly out of, in my opinion. And, even led a decent comeback effort at the end of the game. And even the Washington defense giving up 30, I thought that they played well. They weren't getting blown up on every single run play. Derrick Henry obviously is going to get his yards. He's a tough runner. Lamar Jackson's hard to contain. But I thought they overall did a good job of not getting butchered by the run and holding Baltimore to 176 rushing yards when this was, they were the leading rushing team last year without Henry. And Henry's just been popping off. And this week he didn't bust some 50-plus yard run like he had, weeks prior. But with that being said, I think, both of these teams, very good, very well coached. The Commanders weren't, doing anything that was hurting themselves. And I think both of these teams, look like playoff teams right now. Moving on, we have Cleveland and Philadelphia. I had said that Cleveland is probably the worst team in the league in terms of how their players are performing, and how their players are performing and how the team is being ran. I think Stefanski is very overrated. I do think Deshaun Watson, I think he gets more hate than, he deserves based on like the allegations, things in the past, that he's had to deal with, and people just generally don't like the guy. I think that, he made a decent amount of his passing this game. And the thing that I'll say about him is that he does hold it onto the ball too many times, which really, costs his team. He doesn't really have a run game to speak of on this team. It's one of the problems I see with so many of these teams, that they do not have a run game, and it is that much harder to play a game and to make passes as QB when you are the only production and the other team is waiting for you to pass it. So to me, like, they need Chubb, obviously, but who knows when he's going to be fully healthy. And this is just a team, obviously, with the trade of Amari Cooper, they might think like, oh, it's time to, maybe sell house. I don't think they're going to trade every, key component player on their team, but I think that, they're moving in the direction that they might get rid of Watson. But I don't completely agree with Stefanski that Watson gives them the best chance to win, but it's like the team is just, kind of flatlining in the sense that like not a lot of energy, not a lot of, I don't know, just oomph in the way that they play, kind of around the board, to be honest with you. The only thing that I can say is that the defense is still playing, pretty well. But then looking at Philadelphia, I think that Philadelphia, they did not look very good. They get all these weapons back. They get Smith and Brown back this week. Goddard is playing well. Gets his, his first touchdown. Oh, wait a minute. No, sorry. Goddard, no. I'm thinking of someone else. But it's like Goddard goes out with an injury. I could care less. Kenneth Gainwell was doing well. To me on the limited carries he's gotten. Jalen Hurts not really able to run out of the pocket and escape because this defense is very disciplined and skilled. Saquon not doing much on the run. Even though AJ Brown had over 100 yards, he had 6 receptions off of 9 targets. And some of the passes that I was seeing from Hurts, I'm sorry, but you can't just throw it up. You can't just throw it up and expect, oh, these guys are going to come down for it. It was an ugly like game plan if that's what it was. I don't understand what Sirianni is doing, but he's just one of those guys that he's lost the fans. And essentially you were living by your brotherly shove the whole game, and it's just an ugly win. Doesn't really convince me much about the Philadelphia Eagles. Even when healthy, it's like if this is all you're gonna show me, like your team is I just don't see you as like a contending team, or who you were a couple of years ago when you were in the Super Bowl, and you've supposedly added talent. And it's like Saquon couldn't run it very well. The Browns haven't even been the best defense this year. And, it's just like overall, the Eagles to me, they really, strange to say the least with, how they were playing. Now moving on, we have my Green Bay Packers and the Arizona Cardinals. Looking at this game, clearly the Packers had a very good game plan. I will say that Marvin Harrison going out early just kind of sucks. He only had 2 targets. And, him being out, I really wanted to kind of see like, how Arizona might try to utilize him. Obviously, their biggest threat, Trey McBride has a huge game. They're exploiting the middle of the field, which a lot of teams have been doing against my Packers. I think it's our biggest defensive weakness, surprisingly. Even though, with single high safety, it's most of these that are passes that are around 10 yards that are really killing them, where our middle linebacker Quay Walker has been being punished a lot as the Mike linebacker, and it just seems like he's making some plays here and there, but then he's also muffing a lot of plays. But I think this game, the main takeaway from it is that Jordan Love looks like he's fully healthy. He was on par with all the wide receivers. He was completing passes at a very high clip. He wasn't sacked. I think the O-line was doing, a really good job, this game, even though Love did have to run around sometimes and escape. But he clearly was athletic enough to do that. And, we didn't even have to, we were kind of running back by committee, where it's like Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson, even Bo Meldon got a good big run in there. And then you plug in Chris Brooks at the end of the game, and he's able to, have some good rushing attacks and that sort of thing. Jordan Love did have, a good rush for, first down off of a run and that sort of thing. But overall, looking at this, Christian Watson being back, having that long reception for a touchdown. Obviously, it's good to see him blowing by Budda Baker, who obviously he's a renowned safety. He's a veteran, and even he underestimated the speed of Watson. And then Romeo Doubs coming back from a suspension and having 2 touchdowns, one where it's like Love was in trouble. He hoisted it up to him towards the sideline. And there's Doubs being able to track the football well, make a hands catch, and get, essentially, I mean, I wouldn't say it was a free touchdown, but it was a good anticipation of where to throw it, and the receiver being able to track the ball, and just overall a dominant passing performance where nobody had over 100 yards. You threw it to a number of targets. And, the one sad thing I'll say about this is that, Xavier McKinney's streak ended. but Kyler Murray essentially had to force short passes most of the day, were the only ones that he was really putting, you know, in mid-range downfield were, like I said, the ones in the middle of the field to Trey McBride, who had a good game and was the leading receiver in this game. But overall, just a controlling game by my Packers, and I'm hoping that they don't have these dull drums on offense, and a dominant performance against a team that has been scrappy this year, and they got the job done. Moving on to the Indianapolis Colts game. Obviously, the Colts, they looked very good. They had big plays. Joe Flacco looked pretty accurate. I think that Indianapolis, if their defense can pick up or, play really well, obviously against Tennessee, you're up against struggling Will Levis. He's not doing great. Even though he wasn't sacked at all and that sort of thing, I think he just really lacks these weapons that, that are just inconsistent. I feel like DeAndre Hopkins, is his, I hate to say it, is his best option, when I think that Calvin Ridley should be able to step up and be that true number one guy, and it's like Tyler Boyd's a good complementary wide receiver, but it's like you look at this game, and Flacco, his distribution was really good. They didn't exactly pass it super, super well, but he got 2 touchdowns. He passed the ball downfield, and, he got everybody involved. No wide receiver over 100 yards, which is always strange. You wonder who that it factor guy is. To me, I think, Michael Pittman Jr. is really good, but I think that Alec Pierce is kind of one of those guys that he has that it factor. And 4 targets today, no catches, unfortunately. But I look at this and I think to myself, if the Colts can win these tough games that are, divisional games, and they're away games like this, where they're playing, definitely below average football, I mean, more power to them. And, perhaps they can get it together when Richardson comes back, whether that's next week. But I think that overall, you're still going to be a middle of the pack team, which at 3-3, you kind of are that. But a good strong in their first away game win this year, and Tennessee falls to 0-3 at home. Just a team that's struggling, right now. But moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New Orleans Saints game, obviously a crazy NFC South divisional matchup where I thought, yes, the Buccaneers are going to win, but I did not expect it to be such a back and forth game before the end of the game. Obviously, New Orleans scored all their points in the second quarter, a quarter where, Baker, if you look at the stat sheet, he looks bad, but he isn't, because 2 of his wide receivers had what should have been catches to me, and they but they instead turned the ball over. But overall, Baker obviously doesn't really have to show his resiliency, just kept doing what he was doing, and, played a very solid game as, the league leader in touchdown passes. 4 touchdown passes against what I do still consider to be a scrappy defense, and scoring 51 points on a scrappy defense that ultimately looked defeated. And it's like Sean Tucker looks really good. Bucky Irving looks really good. I think that they should be a running back by committee on Tampa Bay. Obviously, you don't have White, who is their workhorse back, but it's kind of like run with whoever the hot hand is to me. And it's like one, good player to me that kind of stood out was Sterling Shepard. Not only did he have carries for rushes for good, good rushing yards, but he also had some good catches. And, I think that they kind of need to find that guy who is that third wide receiver to be consistent. And Sterling Shepard, I think it's a step in the right direction. Because obviously you have Godwin, who's putting together a, career year potentially. And then Mike Evans, who had a quiet day. But ultimately, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers just relentless on offense with a defense that, wasn't playing terrible. But Spencer Rattler, of course, his debut, couple of picks, couple of just bad decisions. But overall, I think he did very well for a guy who was getting pressured quite a bit by Tampa Bay. And, they didn't really have much of a rushing game. Spencer Rattler with, a few runs for good gains. But it's like, I think that, he did a good ball distributing, and it was a impressive first start for a guy who's, I believe, a 5th round pick. Moving on, we have the Chargers and the Broncos. Now, I had predicted the Broncos to win this game, partially due to the fact that they have what's proven to be a better defense than the Chargers this year, at least in my opinion. Obviously, with this game, you get Surtain, who's knocked out by a concussion the first play, and then Justin Herbert. Herbert, really accurate. His completion, to attempts doesn't really show that, but really accurate, threading the needle on some of these. J.K. Dobbins returning to, having a good amount of, yards and carries, pounding it and pounding it. And, even though you didn't have any receiver with a ton of yards, obviously Herbert passed the ball around a lot, this game. It was kind of one of those where it's like, throw it to the open guy, throw it to the dude you think you can get it to. And overall, Herbert kind of, they played a gritty game, and the defense played a very good game to where it's like, oh, they held them scoreless until the final quarter. I think Bo Nix, this really was a testament to his patience. Obviously, he got sacked a couple times, but overall, I think that Nix, showed that he had good scrambling ability, trying to keep, the game alive, with his legs as well as his arms. And I think that he looks like he's seen the game very well. But yeah, overall, just kind of a shocker to me. The whole thing with Harbaugh was kind of funny, but clearly didn't dissuade the Chargers. Maybe they thought like, hey, we need to go and we need to ultimately, prove that we don't need our head coach on the sideline babying us to win this game. A divisional game, obviously, but props to the Chargers, who rise to 3-2 after they had a bye week the week before. Moving on, we have the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Las Vegas Raiders. Obviously, Pittsburgh traveling to Las Vegas, and Justin Fields not putting up the craziest game. He was pressured quite a bit. Aiden O'Connell getting his first start of the year, throwing 40 times, which I think is ridiculous. I thought the Raiders were trying to use Madison more. He did get 14 carries, but they could not run the ball very well. And, Brock Bowers, having a fairly good game, being the workhorse at tight end for their receptions and 71 yards. But overall, the Raiders looking really bad. They just traded Devontae. I think this team is really ready to prepare for, what's to come in the draft, because I don't think they have their starting QB of the future on the team. I don't think Minshew is it. I think they would need a lot better of a run game and a better O-line if they were to run and then have Minshew as their game manager. But overall, this is a team that's obviously going to have to do some rebuilding and identity checks, but against a tough Pittsburgh Steelers defense, obviously, they did do well in the sense that they only gave up 1 sack. But I'd like to see the Raiders, maybe start Minshew some more, because I think he has more upside than O'Connell. I feel like they kind of just got angry and benched him for whatever reason. But Pittsburgh rising to 4-2. They're clearly a team that, with 4 away games out of 6, and they have a 4-2 record, that's, really, really good for them, seeing as they have a very tough end of the schedule this year. Now, moving on, we have Atlanta and Carolina. I think that Atlanta, while they scored 38-20, Kirk Cousins before this had that 500-yard game against the Buccaneers, which definitely an off game by the Buccaneers, in my opinion. Well-coached defense and all of that. But it's like you go up against the Panthers and you score 38, but Kirk Cousins only has a little over 200 yards. Obviously, the magic, like I've been saying for weeks, of the Red Rocket, Andy Dalton has, wore off. And, Bijan Robinson and Tyler Algier essentially carry this team, which this is kind of how, I thought that they would operate. I felt like they would use Kirk Cousins as more of a game manager, which is what they did this game. Wasn't sacked, was 19 of 30, which is wild to me when you're, this far ahead, and against a team that just got demolished by the Bears. And you supposedly have a lot more, you have a lot of weapons and that sort of thing. But it just overall not that good of a passing game to me. I mean, you had 10 targets to Drake London, and he only has, 6 receptions for 74 yards. Kyle Pitts, 5 targets, 3 receptions for 70, where most of that came from a 52-yard reception. And then it's like Darnell Mooney, who looked like he was potentially going to be the leading wide receiver for yards, which I'm pretty sure he still is. I don't think I need to check that. And he doesn't do much, And then, even Ray McLeod, who seems to have been getting, a good amount of action, it just not much there. So the Falcons win this against, obviously one of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst. I don't really want to say that. Crazy enough, Andy Dalton did have a high completion percentage, but he didn't have that much yards. So to me, and 2 touchdowns and 2 picks, to me, it's like even the Falcons defense, was giving up, a good number of receptions. Obviously, they look a lot better with, the two interceptions and that sort of thing. But that's kind of how Dalton's career has went, where it's like the guy will make completions and then out of nowhere you have a pick. But moving on to the next game on our list, we have the Lions and Dallas. The thing that I'll say about this game is that it sucks for the Lions that Hutchinson is out for the season. I'm not going to make my talk about that, but that is a monster blow. Not only was he having, like, what I like to say, the TJ Watt effect, as, he's been kind of having, one of those years where it's like, he might not have the numbers, but he has the impact. Not only does Hutch have, the sack numbers, but it's not like he's taking all those other plays off. He's getting pressure as well. And it's kind of showing the type of player he could be To me, he reminds me a lot of like a young Julius Peppers with his speed, his length, and just his overall physical talent, and he also has great intelligence. I mean, I've seen, plays where he's always proactive, no matter whether he's batting down, balls from the line, because you can't, it's hard to throw it over this guy, with how tall he is and how lengthy he is. And it's just like, overall, I'm sorry, Lions. As much as I like that Love doesn't have to face Hutch this year, it should never happen. It shouldn't happen, and to the great players. And that's what Hutchinson, and he had put the league on notice, still leading the league in sacks going into this week, despite them having a bye week. But obviously the Lions, to me, I kind of knew that the Lions were going to win this game. Dallas obviously hasn't looked good, and they've looked even crappier at home, which is, ridiculous. Like, what do you not like your stadium? You got the monster big screen. You're inside this lovely, dome that, the light peers through and screws your players up on catches. But it's like, to me, Dak got paid. And I don't feel like he feels the need to play at the level he was last year. He I've been saying it for years, but he's literally like, he's just like Kirk Cousins. He's a little bit younger. He doesn't really, scramble. He can make precise passes, but it's like the dude has lost motivation to play. And with that, nobody's ever going to do good. And your team's not going to be motivated to do well when you have a QB that seemingly, he doesn't give a hoot. I mean, there's a reason they pulled him, at the end of the game. And it wasn't just because, they weren't going to win this game. They're not going to risk injury or blah, 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 blah. Because with the way Dallas is going, it's like, I don't think anybody's going to be scared of Dallas. They could get back DeMarcus Lawrence. They could get back Micah Parsons. But even when they were playing, this team wasn't doing good. And it's like just an absolute mauling by Detroit. And it's like Detroit has clearly had its way with a couple of teams that are would-be playoff teams. And while Seattle, isn't quite as bad as Dallas, you got handled. And you ultimately just couldn't do much about it. And it's like, Dallas, I don't care if you have CD. I don't care if you're not running the ball well. It's crazy to me how they said that McCarthy said he likes Rico Dowdle and he won't let him carry the ball. It's like he only got 5 carries. And then Ezekiel Elliott with 8 carries. And it's like the Detroit Lions, obviously it's going to be up in limbo whether they can still, play as well on defense without Hutchinson. I'm sure it's going to be a little bit of a struggle. But with a guy like Campbell, they're a tough team. They're going to try and figure it out. But props to Detroit. You did America a huge favor on Jerry Jones' birthday. Moving on, we have the Cincinnati Bengals and New York Giants. I had said that I thought the Giants had a good shot in this game. And I didn't say that because I think that Cincinnati's bad. I think this shows that, with the right defensive scheme, you can really do well against Cincinnati. I think their play calling has, I wouldn't say gotten stale, but they rely so much on either one, like the defense breaking down with Chase, or literally Higgins, catching these contested balls, which, don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But you rely on the mismatch that you just have a better wide receiver core than the DB core of the other team. And it showed. The Giants, well coached on defense, scrappy a few mistakes here and there. Joe Burrow getting a 47-yard rushing touchdown, like, it's ridiculous. That's obviously a thing that you'd never think would happen. You know, you maybe would think that if you were playing Lamar Jackson or Josh Allen, you know, hell, like even Daniel Jones with the way he was running it and trying to keep drives alive, you think it would be him because he's obviously fully healthy from his ACL tear. But like, it's pretty, you know, wild to me that, you know, people kind of underrate the Giants. They've kind of been the butt end joke. Oh, Vanilla Vic is garbage. Oh, you know, but now that he's getting protection, yeah, I get it. He was 22 of 41. He's been passing better and he's not taking sacks, you know, taking a sack every single drive, you know, and obviously Cincinnati got bolstered from their D line, so the Giants couldn't rush it as well. And he doesn't have his weapon. He doesn't have, you know, Malik Neighbors, who it's like is their guy. Darius Slayton, who he's had a good, strong connection with, they're getting good passes to him. But it's like overall, you know, you limited Chase and Higgins to below 100 yards each. And if you don't give up the Joe Burrow, you know, rush, this is a 3-point game, which is wild. You know, you may be talking about a completely different narrative then. But it's, you know, what a wild game to me where it's like, you know, I think about this and I think that, you know, the Giants, if they weren't in a division where it's like, yeah, they have the worst record, you know, they could potentially compete, you know, with the Commanders. And I'm not just saying that. I really think that they, you know, they actually have a good head coach and they have a culture that is, you know, they're not flimsy. They're not a pushover team this year. They've gotten some more pieces and they're playing better. Obviously, Cincinnati had their backs up against the wall too. If they had fallen to 1-5, what are the odds you make the playoffs in the division you're in the conference you're in if you fall to 1-5? It's abysmally low, and they needed to win. But props to the Giants for, you know, only scoring 7, but keeping it close by only scoring 7. But moving on. Now we have Buffalo Bills and the New York Jets. Now the thing that I'll say about this game is so many bad penalties. There wasn't really one or any on either team that was like, oh yeah, this was so biased. The crazy amount of penalties. I couldn't believe, you know, what was going on in this game with the amount of penalties. It was just absolutely ridiculous to me. Even Rodgers said the roughing call was not roughing. You know, he clearly wasn't hurt. I think at 40 years old, I think he knows what a roughing call is when you land on the torso. It's like the dude's had how many broken collarbones over his career. Trust me, I know. But overall, to me, the thing that I got from this game is that these teams, obviously Buffalo didn't have Cook. They had Cook. I think it's kind of a similar outcome. Obviously, Ray Davis deserves some carries. He proved that after this game. Ty Johnson did a little bit. Josh Allen, you know, they limited him to scrambling. I think the Jets did very good, you know, on Allen for that, because I swear he almost always has a superhero play. He did running out of the pocket with a good touchdown, but I think that both of these teams, despite them having flipped records and New York only having 2 wins, especially with the Bills adding Cooper, who I think, you know, very underrated. Best QB he's played with is Dak Prescott, which, you know, serviceable QB, but, you know, like I've said, not one of the, you know, it wasn't worth the money. I'll just say it. He wasn't worth the money. but it's like he's had, nobody throwing it to him essentially. I mean, he had Derek Carr and he did, I guess, fairly good. And maybe it's bold to say, but I feel like Derek Carr in the right situation could do better than Prescott. Look at how New Orleans was playing early in the year, but looking at the Jets, I think, you look at a few miscues, the dropped touchdown passes, Mike Williams not catching the ball or making his way back to the ball. I think he's really kind of killed his potential trust with Aaron Rodgers. And of course, now that they have Adams, he's not really going to be the guy to target, even though he's a big bodied guy. He's always had pretty solid hands and he should be able to go up and get it. I just think it's wild that Rodgers has a Hail Mary pass, does it back when he did the Hail Mary Kane, the original triage of Hail Mary Kane back in, what was it, 2015 or 2016? He had, 3 over like a 2-year span. That was crazy. And he did it with essentially no name wideouts. Obviously, most notably Randall Cobb, who isn't a no name, but it's like, you look at this team, and I mean, they finally got Breece Hall going, which is what I've been saying is the problem with the Jets, is they don't have a run game. And then everyone wants to blame Rodgers, even though it's like there's been plenty of dropped footballs. He's had a lot of pressure on him because the line isn't, blocking as what I feel like even as it should be. And, they played a solid game. They played a game that they rightfully should have won. Their kicker missed 2 field goals. I get it. There's kickers that have been missing field goals around the league. This last weekend, there was a number of them that I was like, goodness, there's like a kicker dilemma in the league. But at this point in the season, like, is there really anybody that you can pull in off the street that you believe is going to, ball out or whatever, or, and be able to nail every football? I don't think so. But, the New York Jet defense playing very well. They did a good job. Besides, I guess the supposed penalties. I think that, if they're able to get, another player with Hassan Reddick, which who knows, they might just be going for picks at this point to kind of recoup the picks that they traded for Adams, or the pick that they traded for Adams. But I think that this is a team that they've really come together. They're playing tough. And I think the Jets can really make a run. I think the teams they have, that they're playing here, soon, I think that you have, good reason to hope and think that your team can win. Same with Buffalo. Obviously missing James Cook, but Ray Davis, I mean, he obviously had fresh legs, but he obviously, is quite a hard runner. This is a New York Jet defense that is, very solid at linebacker in their D-line and secondary. And he was smacking guys to the ground with his force. But otherwise, with that being said, and no other games to talk about, that's going to be the end of this video. And I think, next weekend is shaping up to be another kind of crazy week. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys for watching. And if you have any opinions of your own or thoughts or questions you want to ask me, feel free to leave those down in the comments. Otherwise, this is Cast. And I'll finish it off by saying this. Go Pack Go.